Welcome back to Nightly Nonsense, where we make some sense out of the nonsense all around us. So we've been talking about this whole idea of intentionality. I want to talk about something that probably other people have more of a right to talk about, but I'm going to talk about it anyway, and it'll probably bring a bunch of conviction. But we need to be intentional about what goes in to our body. You know, Jesus said it's what comes out that makes us unclean, but stuff has to come in first, right? In order for it to come out. So we need to be careful about what we're ingesting. First of all, that's pretty obvious. We need to be careful about what we're ingesting as food, right? What are you eating? I love my sugar, love my snacks, love my treats, but I know that stuff eventually catches up with you. Eventually, there's going to be a price to pay for this. Again, you and I are called to be intentionally healthy people, right? Intentionally. We know what happens. We know what happens when we eat a bunch of junk, right? We are going to become junk filled. Our bodies aren't made, right, to digest all of that junk. I know that, right? The question is, am I disciplined enough to do something about it? Am I willing to be intentional about what it is that's going into my body? Well, part of that is we need to also be intentional about who we listen to in those areas. Now, everybody has a different take on a diet. Everybody has a different take on what's good for you and what's not good for you. And the truth is that God has made each of us individually in nature. So there's a little bit of difference, right? But the concepts work for everybody. Right? There are some people who can digest sugar better. There are some people who can digest all of these different things, right, out there a little bit better than other people. Some people do have an intolerance for things. But at the core of it is we need to be intentional about being obedient, right, to God. God made our bodies in a certain way to function. They function best when we're doing this, right? It used to be you had to go out and gather your food to eat it. Right now, we just go to the store. We can have food 24/7. We can just keep putting stuff into our mouth all the time. God was intentional about, hey, I'm going to provide for you. Every single morning in the wilderness, the Israelites, they went out and they got their manna, and then they worked on it throughout the day and did whatever they were going to do with it so that they could eat. And then quail came, right? So they did these things. They were intentional. God was intentional. But sooner or later, the enemy, right, he's intentional as well. He introduces things that aren't good for us, things that our body can't digest, and we start getting sick. We start not being who God has called us to be. So intentionality in food starts with ask, right? Ask God about what it is that you're supposed to digest. Ask Him. Again, we don't like that thought. We don't like sitting down for dinner and having to ask God, like, what of this should I have? What should I not have at this moment? Here's the problem with that, right? Too much sugar, too much of the bad stuff makes us tired out. What if God knew that after dinner something was going to happen and you were going to need a lot of energy? You were going to need to be on the top of your game. You were going to need to be mentally with it and physically with it and all these things. Is it possible that God would have said, stay away from this, Andy, right? Drink some water, eat this, right? So that you are ready to go. What I know is coming. You're going to be up all night. You're going to have a hospital visit. You're going to do all that. You need to be ready. What if God actually... Oh, wait, He does know. So maybe if we were intentional about asking Him about what we're to digest, if we were intentional about our digesting of things, then we would be prepared for what He has. But if I eat all this bad stuff and I'm laying on the couch with a stomach ache or I'm just so tired and the phone rings and I need to go do a hospital visit, I'm not in any shape to go. So we need to be intentional about these things, right? It's the same thing with, again, we've talked about what are we looking at? What are we watching? You put a bunch of junk into your thought process, into your brain, you're going to pull those things up. You know, the enemy wants to fill you with ugly things so that he can pull them up. He can put thoughts in your mind. right? He has that ability to be, hey, look at, remember, oh, you've seen this before. You watched that movie and here's what happened and here's this moment. It's the same moment. Right? How many times can we look at things and we all of a sudden get scared or we get, encouraged even because we've watched the moment. Like, oh yeah, this is a great moment. Think about this. Think about how God works. Right? The enemy wants a whole pool of stuff. He wants our brain to become a cesspool of things. Right? Where we just have bad things to pull up, bad experiences, that there's no good thing that we can think about. We've got to train ourselves. We got to put good things in so that the good things come out. So what are you digesting in this whole media thing? What are you looking at on Facebook? What are you looking at all the other platforms? We talked about that. Be intentional about what you're posting. Be intentional about what you're looking at. Right? I don't want to put bad things into my head that the enemy then can work on, right? So careful. Right? What are you digesting in the visual department? What are you hearing? Are you putting yourself in places where you're hearing bad things, where you're hearing gossip, where you're hearing stories you shouldn't hear about, where you're hearing things that are going to tantalize you and get you excited about something like, oh man, I hope I could do this with this, right? Are you putting stuff in your head that are anti-biblical? You're hearing things that make sense to you, but that's not what God's calling you to do. How God works in one person's life, the story he has developed for one person, it doesn't mean that those tracks are going to your house too. Two different people can have cancer, they can have financial problems, they can have relational problems, and it doesn't mean God's going to work the same through both of them. Like sometimes, right, our tracks are curvy and someone else's are straight. Right? They get right through it. We got this long process to go. The people like Jacob, who had to wait 14 years for the woman of his dreams, right? Other people, man, they just went out and got him, right? They saw him, got him, dragged him back to the cave. It was all good. Right? Our process can be different. So we want to be intentional. What am I hearing? Is it going against the Bible? So I can compare. I heard this. Kind of makes sense. God helps those who help themselves. Kind of makes sense. Yep, I got to be involved in doing things. God's not just going to bless me if I'm sitting on the couch doing nothing. But it's not in the Bible. And that didn't say God helps those who help themselves. Actually, God talks about the complete opposite. God helps those who can't help themselves. If you're facing a financial crisis and you've got a bank account that's full, God's probably going to use your bank account first. So we need to be intentional. What am I seeing? What am I hearing? What's coming into my body food-wise, right? What am I digesting? All of those things we want to look at, right? Where am I placing myself? Right? So I hope that you look at this a little bit different. I hope you evaluate and you look at some of the things. What are you putting into your mouth, right? So then what's coming out? Do you have the energy? Do you have the stamina? Do you have the health? Do you have everything you need to be able to do the things that God's called you to do? Same thing. Are you putting things in your head? Right? Are you looking at things that are going to help you do the things that God's called you to do? And are you hearing things that are going to help you do what God's called you to do? We want to make sure that we're being intentional about our digestion of things. So there you go. I'm going to leave that with you, and hopefully you'll digest it well. You'll look at your life, make some evaluations, and hopefully you'll start or continue in some cases, right, to accomplish the thing that God has for you. We'll see you next time. Nightly Nonsense.